It's 3 minutes after the hour, so good morning and good afternoon, and welcome to the Enforme Collaborative. As you know, this webinar series was constituted as a means of sharing issues of common cause amongst those of us in serving professional associations. And in recent weeks, we've been focusing on the issues of this new normal, the effects of the pandemic on every aspect of professional associations, from the CIO to the CFO to membership to meetings, et cetera, et cetera. And today we're really, I think, fortunate to have to be able to turn our attention now to scholarly publishing and the effect that that this new normal is happening to the scholarly publishing activities of professional societies. And we're grateful to have two senior executives from the publishing industry, Kevin Anderer and Jay Flynn, with us today to sort of share their reflections on this moment in time. So let me give a little background on each of our speakers for today, our panelists for today, and then we'll kick things off. Now, one quick note before we begin, we're going to have all the mics on mute except for the speakers. For the beginning, we'll have time at the end for questions, and of course, you can use the chat function at any time to add questions or comments into our discussion. So let me start by introducing Kevin Anderer, who spent nearly 20 years of experience in STM publishing, both in his present position at Wolters Kluwer as Director of Medical Publishing and previously in various strategic publishing and marketing roles. Kevin and I worked together back in the day at Lippincott, Williams & Wilkins. I won't say how many years ago that was, Kevin. Kevin leads a dynamic staff of publishers and senior publishers at WK, responsible for long-standing partnerships with societies such as the American Academy of Neurology, the American Academy of Orthopedic Surgeons, and many others. And as part of WK's core leadership team, Kevin has direct input into division-wide strategic initiatives and implementation plans across lines of business, and helps ensure the continued growth for society partners. And welcome, Kevin. Jay Flynn is also with us, Chief Product Officer of Research oversees Wiley's portfolio of research products ranging from journals to digital platforms. Jay joined Wiley in August of 2010 from Cengage Learning. Jay was with Cengage Learning from 2005 to 2010, where he was responsible for online product development and publishing in the social and health sciences. In 2002, Jay joined Wolters Kluwer Health, where he's Vice President of Clinical Markets. That's where Jay and I first came into contact with one another. He began his publishing career in database management and design in the UK and Germany before moving into digital product sales at Elsevier in New York. So Jay, is there anyone you haven't worked for in this space?
Well, I'm hoping this might end with a job offer from Enforme, Kevin, so we'll see how it goes.
Okay, well, I'll tell you in about 30 minutes. Jay grew up in the publishing industry and is a self-confessed publishing nerd, and we can all attest to that. He has worked in online information management for almost 20 years in a variety of roles, including technology, sales, marketing, and editorial. And he's just across the river from in his Hoboken headquarters. He lives with his wife and 3 kids. And at some point during this, we should have all the children of the speakers come into the room to say hello. That's happened on a couple of occasions, and it adds a lot to the deliberations.
I don't think I can get my 11-year-old away from Animal Crossing, but if it comes to it, I'll see what I can do.
All right, very good. Kevin and Jay, thanks so much for being with us today, and I know your time is at a premium. So let's just go ahead and start. Kevin, I'm going to start with you. Just want to throw out the question is, how has the pandemic most affected scholarly publishing?
Yeah, well, I mean, we're still obviously right in the throes of it, and I think for WK and like everyone, I mean, the first couple weeks, month of this was really just figuring out how we're gonna, do this with most people now working remotely. Obviously, we've got some folks that typically do work remotely and work from home, but to move our whole office to that and try to figure out how that's going to work with getting everyone's internet set up and computers set up, and no access to printers, and how we're going to use Microsoft Teams, and getting all that stuff figured out and getting the technology up and running. So I think the first couple weeks, month was really figuring that out, and we got to the point where I think like everyone else, we've mostly figured it out. We were at WK, we were in some acquisition conversations with some societies around this time, and that, COVID was thrown right into the middle of those conversations, and we were obviously forced to, have some meetings that we would have had in person, some legal conversations that we had to do virtually, and that was a challenge, but we got it done. And, we got a lot of progress has happened over the last couple months, and we're now prepared at WK at least that we're going to be working remotely at least through the end of September, and we're probably prepared that that's going to extend a little bit longer. So, we spent some time just getting used to all this, I think. I think as for the business and the industry, what we're seeing right now is the trends that we were experiencing up until, March 18th or whatever it was, those trends have just been accelerating. So, the growth in the number of submissions to our journals that we've seen was growing at something like 8-9% a year. Just checked with our editorial solutions team. We're up 32% this year in the number of submissions coming into our journals. So there's just a lot more, clinicians and physicians that have the time to submit manuscripts and write manuscripts. And we're seeing just this influx of content coming in. A lot of that is COVID content. I think we've got about 10,000 submissions that were specific to COVID, but there's just a lot of other stuff that's coming out that, introduces all sorts of challenges with bandwidth, with editorial offices, and how we can process these papers, and for the COVID stuff, how we can get it published as quickly and, in most cases, freely available as possible. So really just accelerating that. You see, like some of the revenue trends we're seeing, we've known there's a decline in advertising revenue in our print journals. It's been happening, for quite some time now. We're about, I think, 35% down in pages over the last 10 years or something. This is across the industry. So we've seen those, the kind of pivoting from print pages to electronic, commercial solutions, and advertisers really looking for personalized prescriber data before they're willing to advertise in a journal, and that's been accelerating. We are seeing a challenge in, just in commercial advertising support and revenue. I think when you have something like this where there's this uncertainty about what the future is going to be, the easiest thing to do is kind of press pause on spending. And I think we're seeing that with a lot of advertisers and pharma companies in the industry, just kind of pushing pause right now and not advertising in the journals. On the other side, we've at WK, we've been pivoting over the last several years toward providing solutions for our society partners, really focused on clinicians and getting content, the point of care, stuff like that. And we've made a foray now into a lot of our society partners have canceled their annual meetings, or they've moved to virtual meetings this year as a result of COVID. And we've been able to support our societies in that respect. So that's been, just something we had been moving toward. And as I said, these trends have just kind of been accelerating. So we were kind of, forced, not really forced, but I guess fortunate enough to be far enough along with that we could kind of accelerate that during this trend. I think what we're really coming up on now, as we start getting into, the institutional sales subscription time and renewals coming up for access to our journals as we move into the 2021, and we know that our libraries and our institutional partners are going to be budget challenged. We've always been flexible with packages, and whether an institution wants to buy, a specific journal, or they want to buy a collection of journals, we're going to have to be more flexible going into 2021 with that, because we do expect that there's going to be some budget challenges and, price increases that we may have seen in previous years that were a pretty consistent revenue stream for us and for our society partners. Maybe not as predictable in 2021, frankly. So we're working toward that. But yeah, it's been, overall, I think it's been challenging. This is not to sugarcoat it. This is not easy, and we'd certainly much rather not be in this position. But there are opportunities we're seeing here, the things, like I said, along virtual meetings and with the influx of additional manuscripts coming in, doubling down on our author support, for example, and putting more focus on support for authors and support for editorial offices. So, yeah, so there you go.
Kevin, thank you. Thanks for your candor. And, it's the good, the bad, and the ugly, right,
Yeah.
that we're seeing through this process.
Absolutely.
Jay, what's the worldview from Wiley?
Thanks, Kevin. And sorry, is anybody else getting an echo?
I can hear you fine.
Okay, it was echoing on my end. So, yeah, the worldview from Wiley. I guess I'll start by saying, what I say to my team every week when we get together, which is, our priorities and our ethos tells us that we're going to focus first on people, right? Our people, our authors, our editors, and that hasn't been easy. We've had friends and colleagues get sick. We've had some, unfortunately, pass away from COVID-19. It's been personally challenging for not just the members of my staff, but for our editorial community and for the research community, especially when you think about women scientists who are home bearing the brunt of childcare and trying to struggle to submit, our submissions. We don't track them by gender, but every bit of data, including a paper that was published today in Nature, will tell you that men are having an easier time writing up results and submitting right now than women are. And that there's some gendered stuff going on there. We're trying to provide as much support as we can to all of our authors. Our typesetters, many of them located in places like India and the Philippines, were disproportionately affected earlier than others. And of course, we have global staff. We have staff in my team alone, 16 countries. And so, keeping track of that and coordinating local conditions and global decision-making in the context of local conditions has been a learning experience for management. I think, what's happening in our office in Copenhagen is different than what's happening in our office in Shanghai, or the one in Beijing, or the one in Tokyo, or the team in Melbourne has a different reality than the team in Boston. So that's been an interesting and challenging growth opportunity for the business. So we focused on people first. We've also really tried to focus on our community. So I tell my team, people, community, and the business will take care of itself. And so in the community aspect of things, it's really about making sure that we're in close contact with our editorial boards, making sure we're in close contact with our authors, and then channeling this energy that everybody has to do something, right? What can we do to help? So if it's partnering with the WHO, or if it's partnering with the National Library of Medicine on their COVID article repository, or if it's working with policymakers and the Cochrane collaboration that we publish with to try and get information in the hands of people as fast as possible, good. But we've also had real interesting grassroots stuff. We were an early signatory to a group called Get Us PPE, which was a group of physical scientists and engineers who walked around and looked at labs full of unused PPE and went like, my gosh, everybody's at home under quarantine. Can we get this into the hands of scientists? And so we put our team into the Slack of that group and devoted tech resources and gave away free advertising and things like that so that we could help marry up this opportunity of, chemistry labs sitting empty, full of face masks and gloves and face shields, and get those in the hands of doctors as quick as we could. And there's a community aspect to all of this, right? If it's supporting staff who are ill or whose parents are ill, right through to making sure that people have enough time to volunteer. And, there's a lot of emphasis on making sure people have at least one day a week when we don't have meetings, so they can just take care of stuff, because it's harder because it takes an hour and a half to go to the grocery, right? And you've got to take food to a sick relative and things like that. So it's just a lot of that community stuff, I think, has become has contributed to people's sense of mission, right? And then the last thing is, the business. And I think Kevin talked a lot about some of the challenges. I guess where I net out on this is that there were many things that were happening pre-COVID, right? If it was, the rise of China as a scientific power over the last decade and, surpassing the United States in terms of research output last year. So the migration of research dollars and output from west to east. I think the US's response to COVID will amplify that. I think that the open access movement and in its various forms, and I think it's important to emphasize that the forms are different depending on what region you're in. That movement has been given a real sort of rallying cry around openness, right? Publishers across the board have opened up COVID content, and there's I think an acceleration. We saw yesterday a statement from Plan S out of the UK about their expectations for copyright, for example, which is given emphasis, I think, by this current moment. So things that were happening, right? That obviously the clearing out of campuses challenges remote access, right? And puts strain on publishing infrastructure to deliver remote access, and librarians are trying to cope with that. And so we see many of the things that were happening before. If it was business model disruption, technology disruption and pressure, if it was sort of dynamics in general inside the movement of research globally, those things increase, I think, in speed and alacrity in this moment. And the good news is, for Wiley at least, and that's what the worldview from Wiley is that we have been preparing for all of this to happen. It's just happened a little bit sooner than we thought. And so now, but we know what we're about. We know what our strategy is, and we, in the context of this particular meeting, are delighted to partner with more societies and associations than anybody else in the world to help, go on this journey to the future together. Because we do feel like, again, coming back to community for a second, societies are the conveners of community in the research disciplines. And as a result, our obligation to them as their partner is to help them with this through this period of uncertainty, and then as we embark in this accelerated period of transition.
Okay, thanks very much. That was a great overview. So, scholarly publishing, the mission to educate, the financial aspects of publishing, so vital to the ongoing activities of professional associations. All of that being strained at this time and challenged at this time. Jay, let me ask you, what advice would you be giving to the professional association space as to how they can best navigate through this time of uncertainty and change?
A couple of things, Kevin, and I think that I'd like to maybe, for myself, rhetorically turn the question around and sort of talk about what our best, most progressive, most provocative society partnerships are like, and what those characteristics are like, because that's how I want all of our relationships to be, right? I want them to be mutual in their exchange of ideas, and provocative for us in terms of the way that we handle things. So the first piece of advice I would give would be to focus on diversification of the business. I think that the days of, well, and Kevin alluded to this before, right? If you look at societies and their traditional income streams, I think you could make an argument that each of those income streams is potentially challenged, was challenged before, and is challenged now in an accelerated way by the COVID crisis. So an in-person meeting, which generated a lot of revenue, has to move virtual, and has to move virtual quickly. Print advertising, as Kevin talked about, is going the way of the dodo. I think there's obviously university financial health concerns that inform librarian renewal decisions. You see a lot going on with Unsub and other tools where big deal collections are being sort of unbundled, which creates challenges for journals which are generally sold in bundles and can potentially challenge subscriber numbers, which again has a downturn or a depressing effect on advertising rates and readership rates. And of course, there's a business model disruption, right? So we focus a lot on primarily in the form of open access. So we focus a lot on ways that we can help our partners achieve their goals of financial stability and security for the long term. So if it's growing membership in China, we'll put an editor with your business card on our payroll in our China office and help you get set up there right away. But if you need to do that, we're glad to do it. If it's recruitment, right, and job boards and using your convening authority to help you think about ways to connect your members with jobs, that's a useful thing that we can help you do. If it's about better meeting management, if it's about ways for us to help you with platforms via our ad-upon business and those things. Those are things that we're talking to our big and small partners about because those needs, and many of them are the same needs that we have in our own business, right? The journals that we own and operate are facing the same pressures that the journals that you own and operate are facing. And so we feel like we try to take what we learn from all of our partners, synthesize it with what all of ad-upon's customers are telling us, synthesize it with what we're learning from our own business, and come up with strategies that make sense. So the advice I would give is maybe not to talk too much about Wiley, but just in general, find partners and interlocutors that you can have these challenging conversations with. It doesn't have to be with Wiley, but it should be with someone that you trust that can help bring an outside-in perspective on Plan S and the OSTP and on recruitment and on what's going on with the most directive out of China and what's happening with APC price pressure globally as a result of funder mandates and whatever it is, right? Those things. One of my really good friends left Wiley and took a big job at a self-published society. And when we'd meet regularly for coffee in Hoboken, and one of the things he said to me was what he missed about working at Wiley was just being able to talk to somebody in the hallway who wasn't part of the volunteer leadership or who wasn't part of his peer group, who was working on other issues that weren't publishing issues, membership issues or events issues. And somebody to talk about publishing stuff with. And I think what I would encourage people to do is find somebody to talk about publishing stuff with. If it's not us, it should be somebody out there who sees these things at scale and has some resources to help you navigate the changes.
Yeah.
Great reflections, and thank you for that. And this theme of being starved for colleagues, I think is particularly acute now, given the changes that we're going through in all aspects of professional associations. So Kevin, let me put the same question to you. How would you advise professional associations to attempt to better navigate these uncertain times?
Well, I think a lot of the stuff that Jay said obviously resonates, particularly the diversification. We really advise our partners not to put all your eggs in one basket, whether it is revenue streams or product development. We need to be working toward a number of different avenues now. We've also got, I see Patty Baskin is on the line from the American Academy of Neurology, and Michael Clark is here, who worked on the American Academy of Orthopedic Surgeons renewal a couple of years ago with us. And those two societies, while they have a lot of commonality, are not the same. They don't necessarily have the exact same needs, and their members don't have the exact same needs. So we really look, when we're partnering with societies, we look really to have a bespoke approach to those societies and work toward what, is best for their members. I think what is common across a lot of our society partners now is, there was a time where the journal, was, along with, access to the annual meeting, was the biggest revenue driver for the society and one of the biggest member benefits that society members get. And certainly now we think, the journal itself isn't good enough anymore. You've got a lot of, at least in the physician world, physicians moving out of private practice, moving toward institutional service, and they're likely getting those journals, from their institution. They don't necessarily need that from the society anymore. So in many cases, that big member benefit is becoming increasingly, certainly not irrelevant, but they're getting it from different places. So what we find that a lot of our society partners and their members are looking for is, this increased demand for an integrated end-to-end product that they can get from a society. So they want to go to their society and be able to get the journal, be able to get any kind of textbook content, educational materials, CME, adaptive learning is gaining in prevalence now. They want to be able to get to that stuff in one place as easy as possible, and not have to go to a bunch of different platforms and a bunch of different providers and a bunch of different publishers to get that. So, and this obviously presents some technology challenges, right? Because in a lot of cases, these are on different publishers and different platforms. So we're trying to find ways to unite all that content with our societies and make all this material that's out there easier to get to and make it more clinically relevant to promote better outcomes. So a lot of our efforts with our societies right now is really pivoting toward technology challenges. And by doing that, I think it's both for publishers, and I'm sure Jay would agree with this as well, and our society partners, it's important to be lean in your product development cycle. We have to get these things done, as smartly and as quickly as we can. And we need to, there's a phrase we used to say years ago, fail quickly. So let's get things out there, and if they don't work, let's learn from that and let's build the next iteration of what is going to work. But let's get things out there and let's do things. We alluded to Plan S, and we didn't allude to, but obviously the executive order that was coming out of the OSTP earlier this year about driving toward open access in the United States, which is pretty much pressed pause right now on that. But that stuff is not going away. So, our business models are going to be changing, and we're moving toward a largely OA versus subscription model. And we need to be prepared for that as well. So, guidance for societies right now, pretty much the same thing Jay said at the top of his talk, was diversification. Like, we need to be doing a bunch of different things, not putting all our eggs in one basket, and, make sure that we're trying to meet the evolving needs of their membership. And let's be willing to fail quickly. But let's do it.
Great. Thanks, Kevin. I would remind everyone that the chat function is available to you if you have any questions or comments, and we're going to open it up to the audio for questions in just a moment. Our friend David Schulman, who is a well-known technology consultant to many professional associations, asked the question, have these forces accelerated the move to digital? And I think the answer is resoundingly yes, but I'd like Jay, for you to take the first crack at that, if you would.
Sure. So it's public record that our research business is sort of more than 90% digital already. I think so in terms of acceleration, not per se, I think what I'd focus on though is the need to pivot from a subscription economy to an article economy, and what that implies and what that means. Because the back office systems and the front office systems, the systems we use to keep score and the systems we use to move content around, the systems that authors use to submit, transaction systems, OA payments, reporting, are informed by the business model shift and are informed deeply by local requirements that funders or other big consortia, primarily on the national level, have in our business. So it's not an acceleration to digital, it's what is digital in a world where, for example, we're still moving around Word documents and TIFF images in Scholar One when the rest of the internet is writing for the medium and having a consumer grade experience with their tools. And so for us, this drives investment in authoring, and it drives investment in transactions, and then it drives investments in reporting, all in service of kind of redefining what scholarly communications in the scholarly article is. Because the core drivers of open, and open isn't just open access, right? It's open science, it's open data, it's open source, it's reproducibility, it's open peer review. Those drivers are coming not from the researchers themselves and from tenure committees. They're coming from the funders. They're coming from the paymasters. They're coming from national governments. They're coming. It's, you know, in Germany, in the coalition agreement between the two governing parties right now, in their manifesto, there's a section about open access in the government, in the convening document for the government of Germany. In the UK, we see this being a national priority. You know, I went to the White House for the meeting Kevin's talking about with the OSTP, and I think that at that meeting, it became clear that the priority is not forcing publishers to change business models. The priority is forcing scientists to collaborate and facilitating data sharing and a culture of innovation, right? And so our job is to enable that. And one of the biggest areas we can do that in is by reckoning with the infrastructure that we have, that I think I would argue across the board, with the exception of a few born native OA publishers. And I don't think we have any of those on the call today. We're still using the same tools basically that we were using 20 years ago to facilitate scholarly communications. We're still using Word, we're still using JPEG, we're still using TIFF, we're still using PDF, we're still using ScholarOne, we're still using all of those systems. And all of that is where we're focusing. And we have some stuff that we're using now that I think is game changing in terms of the way that we're going to be able to move data faster. We're going to be able to use AI tools to disambiguate and to speed processes. There's no reason in the world why any of us should be in a business where an article, once it's accepted, can't go online immediately. In that, you know, that's an opportunity for us, I think, as an industry. And I think that maybe just a piece of advice, like if I can sneak one in, would be open to changing the author experience and maniacally focusing on improving it, because the benchmark is not what the peer reviewers had to do when they submitted articles when they were getting started in their careers. The benchmark is what's happening on Twitter and what's happening on Facebook and what's happening in the Apple ecosystem and what's happening in the Google ecosystem. That's the benchmark that I think, you know, what's happening on GitHub, right? That's what researchers are interested in. That's where they want to live. And I think as an industry, we need to live there and not be sort of looking backwards at how it's always been done.
Yeah, I
important
certainly
points,
agree
Jay.
that we've accelerated the transition to digital, certainly. I mean, I would say, just to add a little bit on to what Jay is saying, I mean, we haven't launched a new print journal product in I don't know how long, right? All our focus is on really not even launching new journals, it's launching these new kind of integrated products with our society partners. That said, I think it's also important to, you know, in situations like this where we've got, you know, a crisis situation going on that's impacting our business, not to overreact, right? So we also need to hedge this a little bit. If you had asked me, you know, 10 years ago, how much longer does print have? I probably would have said 5 years. If you asked me 5 years ago, I probably would have said 5 years. If you asked me today, I'll probably say 5 years. But print seems to find a way to stick around in a lot of cases as well. But we're certainly on that, you know, that move away from that. I think looking at Patty Baskin again on the call, I mean, what is interesting is what the American Academy of Neurology has done with their print edition of neurology, which is basically just transformed the print version of neurology into something that is, you know, more relevant to the clinician and more relevant to the AAN member that wants to still read a print journal. And that print journal is not, you know, a bunch of research articles that are 7, 8, 9 pages. These are clinical summaries or one-page summaries of those articles. And neurology's had great success with kind of, not just abandoning print altogether, but reinventing it, while also continuing to work toward, all these integrated solutions I've been talking about. So, in summary, yeah, we're moving toward digital. This is accelerating it, but there's still opportunity there for some print stuff, I think.
That's great. Well, we have time for a couple of questions. If folks want to raise their hand and ask a question, now would be a good time to do that. While they may be thinking of the question, let me go back to something you said earlier, Kevin. And I was intrigued at this delta between a 33%, 32% increase in manuscript submissions, yet year-over-year decreases in the funds available for large collections, libraries, consortia. How do you manage that, the delta between that? Or is there a relationship between the volume of manuscripts and the monies available for institutional subscriptions?
Well, I think that maybe not directly connected in this case. We've certainly got, I think in this case, it was a result of, physicians and researchers having the time to write and submit manuscripts. I think that was a large part of it. They're not, in practice, or they're not in surgery, or their institutions are closed down. So there's that time to do that. I think what is interesting, and there was an article in the Scholarly Kitchen, I think yesterday, about, the challenge we're having is we're getting this giant influx of content that's coming in, and we only have so much bandwidth to manage this content. And that's why you're seeing, the rise of preprint servers as well. That's a conversation for another time, certainly. But, is there a way to, potentially start thinking about things like submission fees for articles that are coming in, which was something that was, big several years ago, and we haven't really, most journals, I would say, haven't really pursued that avenue, but that is something maybe we need to start thinking about, is monetizing, the art. I think Jay mentioned an article-based economy, right? Finding ways, if, these, potentially institutional revenue streams are being challenged or going away, are there ways to transition some of that opportunity to the front end and monetize some of the manuscripts? I think, there's also obviously read and publish deals we see where we're bundling our institutional, access to institutional journals with the APCs, potentially bundled with an institution. So that's going to increase in frequency as well. But I don't know, Kevin. I don't know if I see a direct correlation right now between the amount of manuscripts that are being submitted and institutional funding for subscriptions. I'm not sure if there's a direct correlation there. Jay, maybe you'll disagree, but.
Right. So, library budgets grow within a couple basis points of GDP, pretty much. That's been true for 20 years. And research output, research being a key priority of big economies, research output for the last decade or so has grown at about 9%. I don't believe that. And so, you've got libraries going at about 1 or 2% a year. Globally, and you've got research output at about 9% a year globally. So that when you look at those two graphs, right, the question I always ask a partner is, which line do you want to be on? Do you want to be on the 2% line or the 9% line? And if you want to be on the 9% line, then you have to rethink the business you're in. Are you in the business of rejecting as many submissions as you possibly can so that you can kind of chase the dragon of the impact factor? Which, by the way, there's no evidence to support the theory that rejecting more gets you a higher impact factor. Just putting that out there as my one controversial soundbite for the day, I hope. But I do believe that, folks tend to over-rotate on this notion of exclusivity when they should be publishing more. And one of the things we look at in a partner is their flexibility around what they want to do with growth as regards articles. Because for us, in a move to an article economy, either you can publish that research and monetize it and hang stuff around it, right? If it's advertising, if it's webinars, if it's infographics, if it's author services, if it's author reputation services, if it's pre or post print services, if it's PAR deals, if it's other kinds of transitional deals, All of those things become possible if you have a revenue per article that is lower than the average APC on a global basis. If, however, you have revenue per article that's 5 times or 10 times or 20 times higher than the average APC on a global basis, then you're going to be pot stuck at some point in a world where your journal, while incredibly profitable at this moment, becomes less and less acceptable to the funders as a place to publish, as a destination of choice for funded research. And if you cut yourself off from that, you're going to run into 2 problems, right? The first problem is you're not going to be able to get onto that article line. You're going to be stuck on the library line. And then the library line is eventually going to be subject to intervention in the marketplace by funders, by governments, who say, you know what, that we don't actually think that this is cricket. We don't think this is the way this should work anymore. And when it comes time to flip, and not if, but when it comes time to flip, you're going to wish that you had started publishing more articles today, rather than trying to do it all at once later when the fuse is much, much shorter.
Yeah.
So the same thing applies to diversification, by the way, and revenue replacement strategies. But I think in the context of the core journal itself, you know, I think that the opportunity for societies is their convening authority, their history, their legacy, their brand, and their quality, right? Our best performing journals are society journals, without a shadow of a doubt, right? They're the best performing journals we have. When we do partner journals, new launches, when we do jointly owned titles, when we do spin-offs, when we do brand extensions, we want to work with societies who are proactively going out and looking to grow, and who want to be on the front foot about this change. It is not the time to retrench right now, in my opinion. In my opinion, it is time to step on the gas and achieve speed to make the curve.
Yeah. Yep.
Great comments. Tremendous content. Thank you guys so much. We try to keep these at around 45 minutes because we know folks are really busy. No one's got an hour to devote to anything anymore. So we'll conclude the webinar here. We're going to be posting a recording of this on YouTube once we do a little post-production. But I want to thank both of you for your generosity and for the really valuable insights that you brought to us today. So again, thank you all both very much. And with that, we'll conclude today's webinar.
Thank you so much.